Hi, I'm Liz, or the Wayward Weirdo. I thought I might introduce myself as I was hoping to debut my novel here on YouTube. I'm not great at cultivating community, but I thought I might at least try and get some feedback or see if people were interested in listening to my novel. This is my debut novel. It's a historical fantasy fiction set in Joseon era Korea. I think it's pretty clear I'm not Korean. I'm not BIPOC. I'm just a white girl who spent the last 12 years living and traveling through Asia. My last job was as an editor for a company in Korea, so hopefully that means the novel isn't complete trash. But everyone is entitled to their opinion. I have done a lot of research to try and get the historical and fantasy elements of the story right, but at the same time, I'm not perfect, and I have taken some artistic liberties with the characters that I have written about. Feel free to voice any constructive criticism you have in the comments, and I'll do my best to address your concerns if you have any. Uh, okay, so the elevator pitch. A young noble, Jiho, and his sister are sent to check in on a small village after a dire plea for help. On the way there, Jiho is faced with supernatural threat that could tear down the Kingdom of Joseon. Will he be able to stop it in time? What other dangers could be lurking beyond the veil? You'll have to stay tuned to like the video and subscribe if you want to know more. One more thing. There will be Korean words interspersed throughout the novel. I'll try to leave a post at the beginning of each chapter to explain each term that's used in that chapter in lieu of footnotes. Um, So for the prologue, there are four terms used. Number one, hanok. It's a type of traditional Korean house with the slanting roofs and the underfloor heating. Number two, hanbok. Those are the traditional clothes worn by Koreans for millennia. I think they're pretty popular now. So um, I think it's easy to picture what they look like. Um, Number three, yobo. This is a term of endearment spoken usually by older people when they're referring to their partners. So a wife or a husband would say it to each other. And finally, changsung, number four. Those are changsung are totems, generally made of wood or stone, and they're used to represent a deity. And they would be placed in or just outside of a village, and they would act as protection for the villagers. Um, I think that's all from me. As I said, if you have any constructive feedback, or if you just want to tell me you enjoyed the first chapter of my novel, please feel free to leave a comment below. I look forward to hearing from you. But until next time, that's it for me. Bye. A foreboding shriek pierced through the night. It was a shriek that could only betray one thing: death. The moon, despite its fullness, offered little illumination this night, as it had become shrouded by a dark gray blanket of clouds. A husband and wife sat up in their bed as a second shriek rolled through the streets. Two small children, eyes betraying their terror, ran to them and were welcomed quickly by a familiar embrace. Shim Kyu-song did his best to comfort his wife and children. However, the feeling in his gut each time there was a new wail or shriek that filled the night made it impossible to ignore the potential danger lurking just outside the door. As each second passed, he came to terms with the fact that he was going to have to face the unknown outside if he truly wanted to protect his family. The next shriek lasted longer than the others, and built in tenor with each new wail until it was cut off by wet gurgling and then silence. The children buried their heads deeper into their mother's breast as she did what she could to shield their ears from the brutal sounds that continued to fill their small hanok. She looked to her husband, who had quietly pulled on his hanbok and silently pleaded for him to stay. He met her gaze, giving her a look he hoped conveyed comfort, and made his way to the door. He fixed his clothes, searched for a lantern, and surveyed his wife and cowering children, he hoped not for the last time. He took a deep breath to steel himself before leaving the room. Kyusong made his way to the gate of the short fence that surrounded his family's home. A few men from the village had already congregated in front of his gates, including his father, who held a long, heavy pole and offered him a sharpened scythe. Another shriek rang out into the night, causing the men gathered to flinch and murmur in fear. Kyusong's elderly mother, standing at the door to their house, called out to her husband, "Yobo, don't be a hero." Her lips pursed in annoyance, but her worried eyes betrayed her. Her husband gave her a resolute nod, and she picked up her pace across the small courtyard of her son's home, her steps carrying her swiftly to her grandchildren. The crowd outside Kyusong's home had grown since the first shriek. Those who had been courageous enough to venture out of their modest houses were armed with the ragtag tools they used daily. A particularly gruesome shriek was followed by a snarling growl that caused Kyusong's stomach to sink even deeper than it already had. He took another steadying breath and raised his scythe as if it were a talisman of protection before taking his first steps towards the village center. They carried on through the narrow alleys between the hanoks. Walls and gates separated the men and women who had been brave enough to continue on towards the village center, but their progress was hindered by the fearful faces of family and friends who had not been able to bring themselves to join the growing crowd. With every new neighbor they met, nods and short bows were exchanged. They carried on, wide-eyed, towards the ghastly screaming and moaning that had woken them in the dead of the night. Their numbers had grown, but it had provided little comfort against the chill that had permeated the balmy summer air. Their hesitant steps led them closer to the village magistrate's compound. They cowered behind each other as they streamed through the closed market stalls and shuttered stores. Places that would normally provide comfort and familiarity were instead casting eerie shadows across the path leading to the community meeting place. A small crowd had already formed outside the grand entrance. There should have been a small outfit of guards flanking them, but tonight it looked as though the guards had abandoned their posts. Instead, lamplight revealed a faint mist of discoloration across the gate. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd gathered at the doors, and Kyusong and his father elbowed their way forward. With one final push, they stumbled, knocking against the door before them. It creaked under their weight, and a sliver of light from within the compound appeared. The villagers, confused, shared looks that darted back and forth between themselves and the door. Kyusong's fingers whitened as they curled even tighter around the shaft of his scythe. He gulped, and then issued a shuddering greeting to the guards that should have been stationed at the door. Hello? Sirs, we heard..." He trailed off. The murmurs of the crowd died down, and Kyusong pushed at the door. It creaked again. He looked back at the others gathered and sought their silent approval before he put more weight behind the door. It inched forward, leaving enough space for those gathered around to peer within. Neighbors, who were not rooted to their spots, took a few steps back. Several of them reached for their mouths as their breath escaped in gasps. Kyusong and his father stumbled back into the crowd, their lips moving but no sound escaping as they tried to make sense of what they were looking at. Finally, one of the villagers was able to draw in enough air to release the tormented scream they were all collectively trying to voice. Staring back at them, eyes wide and mouth agape, in a grotesque but silent wail, was the head of one of the guards speared on a pike. The whites of his eyes bulged in their sockets, and blood dribbled down the pike from the shredded remains of his neck. The crowd remained stuck in a horrified tableau until another scream from a terrified villager filled the air. The crowd recoiled in horror. Their collective gasp formed an eerie symphony that was accompanied by the sudden and deafening return of the chirps and croaks of the forest. Though the villagers hadn't recognized their absence, they were startled by the ferocity with which they had returned. Kyusong's heart pounded in his chest, and a cold sweat drenched his brow. Mustered courage led him to push the gates further open, revealing the full extent of the macabre scene before them. The once immaculate courtyard of the magistrate was now a nightmarish tableau. Strewn torsos lay lifeless, their blood painting the ground in a grim mosaic. Shadows danced ominously as the flickering lantern's light caught the glint of blood smeared on nearly every surface of the courtyard. The white walls of the compound's main hanok were crimson. Parts of soldiers, arms and heads mostly, were gathered and tied together in a macabre totem that resembled the Changsung where the road led into the village. Kyusong took a hesitant step forward, and his father's hand squeezed his shoulder firmly, urging caution. Whispers and wails of fear and disbelief spread through the villagers like wildfire, their eyes darting from one horrific sight to the next. The deathly Changsung, piles of torso with entrails trailing away like tentacles, heads piked in a semicircle before the magistrate's blood-soaked house, and the body of their former magistrate, strung up between two beams and flapping like fresh laundry in the wind. His body had been opened. His bones and entrails were piled below his flesh and had attracted a buzzing horde of black flies. Every instinct screamed in Kyusong's body for him to turn back, to flee the malevolent force that had claimed the lives of these people. His jaw clenched as he took a deep breath, and he thought of his wife and children cowering in their home. He didn't know who was better off, himself for having seen this brutal scene, or his family being haunted by the horrific screams from before and not knowing who or what had made them. Kyusong's resolve solidified. His eyes met his father's, and after taking a deep breath, they both took steps towards the darkened compound before them, unaware of what unseen horrors still lurked within the shadows.